Hello everyone, and welcome to another Singerreise video podcast. My name is Jonathan Sylvia, and I'm your host. Thanks for joining us. Today's video is the first in a series that we'll do about the process of writing in a translation into your vocal score. It's a common experience for opera singers and singers of classical music, so this is more on the business of singing and the best practices of being a successful singer. We'll get into some of the nuts and bolts of it, some of the nitty-gritty details, and at times that might get a little bit boring or obvious, but hang in there, and I think we'll all be able to learn something from this. For today, we're going to deal with the why of writing in a translation. We'll get into when we do it, and then just talk about some of the most basic tools for getting the process going. Let's start with the question of why bother writing in a translation into our score? Well, as singers of classical music, we encounter foreign languages on a pretty regular basis, but the audiences that we sing for don't necessarily speak those languages all that well. It's still our responsibility as singers to know the meaning of the words inside and out, and then to be able to communicate that meaning with our audience members. After all music is about communication. In fact, words are the most distinctive feature of vocal music. Words and music together, well, that's our unique province. So just simply mouthing sounds isn't going to cut it here, even if we have impeccable, perfect diction. There's also an added bonus about the physical writing part of this process. By actually putting your pencil to the page and writing out every single word, you wind up learning those words far more thoroughly. There's really just something magical about the act of doing that helps with the learning process. In fact, I find that when I do this process and write out all of the words into my score, I wind up learning more from doing that than I do from actually reading what I wrote. Doing this is far, far better than printing out a translation, for example, and having that in your back pocket and trying to read through it every now and then. That's not going to work. Next, let's deal with the question of when, in the process of learning a song, should we write in a translation? Well, I would do this after the first initial run-through of a piece, where you're just checking to make sure that a piece fits in your range. But I would do this before you start getting into learning all of the notes and rhythms of the piece. I would also put this before you start woodshedding memorization of it, and definitely, absolutely, this must happen before your first day of an opera rehearsal or before you start working on the piece in a lesson with your teacher. In fact, if you are a student, I would try and get this started on the very first day that a piece gets assigned to you. Your teacher will thank me for this. To write in a translation, we're also going to need a few tools. We're going to need a pencil, an eraser, obviously, a good clean score. We're going to need what I call a starting translation. We'll need to have a language dictionary at hand and a laptop. So some of these are a little more complicated than other ones. Some are rather obvious. And for today's video, we're just going to handle the obvious one. And you can see my later videos for the less obvious ones. So let's get started. To write in a translation, we need to have a pencil. Here's my pencil. It's a pencil I got from Staples by the dozen. It's a mechanical pencil with 0.7 millimeter lead in it. I like 0.7 better because it tends to be a little easier to erase and doesn't cut as deep into the page. So, alright, it seems a little obvious that we need to have a good pencil, but hear me out on this. A vocal score is often crowded with expression markings and notes and words and the piano part, and sometimes there's not a lot of room on there. If we don't start from the very beginning by writing tidily and legibly, we're going to not be able to use what we write in there. It has to be legible. I personally have terrible, terrible handwriting. My wife can attest to this. But if I'm not satisfied with how I've written a word, I'll actually go ahead and erase it and keep writing it until I'm satisfied with how it looks on the page. So having a good pencil is a good start for that. Next up on the list of obvious tools we're going to need, we need to have an eraser. Here's the eraser I use. It's a pink pearl eraser, and I've used it so much it's only half of a pink pearl eraser. So you want to make sure to get something that's good here. You don't want it to be dried up and crusty, otherwise you're going to wind up leaving smear marks on your page, and that's just the worst thing ever. You probably also don't want to rely on the eraser on the back of your pencil. Those are often too small or dried up, and especially on mechanical pencils, those are not going to get you through an entire opera. So get yourself something nice that's going to last you for a few operas. While we're on the subject of pencils and erasers, note that until this point in the discussion, I haven't used the word pen. Well, simply put, never use a pen when you're marking your score for any reason, really. You never know when you're going to go back to the score with fresh eyes and need to erase or write in something different. So, always use pencils, please. Last on our list of obvious tools that we need is to have a good, clean vocal score to write into. Now in this case, using a photocopy is fine, and some people even prefer it because that means that they can keep the original nice and clean. Sometimes you can't do this with a full opera score, but it's really good for doing art song. That way you don't have to lug the books around with you. Try not to do a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Try to keep it to just a first generation photocopy, and the best ones are photocopies of something that's already on your library shelf. Personally, what I like to do is to scan my scores into the computer as a PDF, and then every time I start the new project, to print out a fresh copy of that PDF. Things from IMSLP are also fine to use, so long as the scan quality of that PDF is good enough that you can read all of the notes and that you can read the original text. And sometimes that's a little bit hit and miss when it comes from IMSLP. So yes, we've talked about pencils and papers, and perhaps this hasn't been the most riveting of videos. Even so, I hope you learned something from this, and I hope that you'll come back for the next one. In the next video in this series, we'll be talking about using a starting translation and what the various types are and how to select them. In the video after that, we'll talk about language dictionaries and about using laptops. If you want to stay up to date with any of the Singerreise videos, please subscribe to this YouTube channel, and that helps me promote it as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope you come by for the next one.